Once Upon a Swedish Forest. Now the Swedish forest is so very different to our Australian bush. You know, the Australian bush is sort of grey, blue, leathery, and it has a cacophony of cicadas, cockatoos and kookaburras. But the Swedish forest, well, that forest is dark, hushed, soft. It's the forest of fairy tales. And they have tall pine and spruce trees that silently soar up into the sky like towers. And underneath, there's beautiful birch trees that glow green in the shadows, and blueberry bushes droop with plump, ripe fruit. And there's enormous magical circles of mushrooms, and soft moss muffles all sound. Well, it was just such a forest I found myself in 2015. Sorry, it's just a little bit higher. So I found myself in this forest in 2015 in Sweden when I went there with my lovely husband, Ulf. And we lived for 3 months in a folk school, and out the back door there was this Swedish fairy tale forest. And one day on the news I heard that there were wolves seen lurking locally, and I wasn't at all surprised because I fully expected to see some kid in a red hoodie skipping by going, "I'm on my way to Grandma's, I'm on my way to Grandma's, I'm on my way to Grandma's." So yeah, I wasn't surprised there was wolves there. Now this forest had a path that wound all the way around it, and it went from our back door down past a lonely lake, and it circumnavigated that whole forest and came back to our door. Now the pathway wasn't long, it was only about, I don't know, 3 kilometres long, so that meant that the forest was, I don't know, I missed the week of pi r squared, but it was a small forest. And some days I was content to walk around the forest, to follow that path barefoot like so many other feet had done before me, but some days the forest called and it told me to step off the path. And so like Little Red Riding Hood, I left that well-worn path. And some days the forest did indeed seem very small. I could walk across that forest some days and be out the other side in less than 10 minutes. But there were other days when the forest called and a carpet of moss green would unfurl before me, leading me in deeper and deeper to just explore her mysteries. And you see, that forest had a secret. It was bigger on the inside. So some days I would step off the path and I would wander into those trees, and one day I was following a pathway of golden chanterelle mushrooms, and they led me deeper and deeper in until I found a hidden valley that I'd never seen before. And in this hidden valley I found a small stone circle. And I wandered around that valley with that stone circle, and I wandered wide-eyed with wonder, just drinking in that forest. And there were tiny little forest frogs, no bigger than my thumbnails, jumping for their lives as my giant feet trod through their lily-put land. And I sat down in the middle of that rock circle, and I wondered what ancient hands may have built it. And then another day I was also lured off the path, and I went to find that rock circle again, but I couldn't. Instead I found a different valley, and I found a ruin of an old building. And I sat down on the wall and I plucked blueberries from the bush and popped them in my mouth, and I looked at the lichen-decorated walls. And I shut my eyes and I wondered, well, what hands had built this ruin? Vikings, perhaps. And then I felt a presence. I thought perhaps it was the ancient stonemason, and when I opened my eyes, right in front of me stood a mother deer and her little fawn. And just for a moment, we looked into each other's eyes, and in that brief, timeless moment, we were connected. And I felt like I was connected to the whole forest, heart to heart. And over those 3 months, I had many experiences like that where I felt totally connected to the forest. It was like I discovered some secret magic power, like a witch in the fairy tales can sort of zap out things from her fingers and make frogs dance and do all sorts of things. Well, I felt like I had this superpower that I could zap out from my chest and send these bolts of love to trees and rocks and everything, and I could connect to everything in that forest. And so, as I walked wide-eyed with wonder like a child, I would send out these little tendrils of love and invite the forest to connect with me. But then, one day, I think my superpowers might have gone to my head a tad, because I was walking through the forest and I was, instead of walking wide-eyed with wonder, I was sort of bulldozing my way through, and I was blasting everything with shots of love from my chest like crazy, and I'm sort of saying, I love you, tree, love me back. I love you, rock, I love you, love me back. And I'm blasting my way through the forest like some sort of colossal crazed Care Bear on crack. And then I realised, I wasn't getting that fuzzy, warm feeling anymore. And I realised that perhaps I was just overdoing it a tad. And as I laughed and laughed and laughed at how hard I was trying, all of a sudden I saw a flash of light in a tree. And still laughing, I made my way over to that tree and I stood beneath a pine tree. And it just showered me with love. And I stood there under that tree in a totally blissed out state. And then I heard an ominous sound. It wasn't the snarl of a wolf, it was worse. It was the snuffle and the snorting of wild boar. And I saw the thicket just in front of me start to move. And a little voice in my head said, Lindy, you might want to run. But then another voice spoke, and I don't know whether it was me or whether it was that tree. But that voice said, peace, be still. And so I stood next to that tree as out of that thicket came 2 enormous wild boar. And they just walked on by. And that Swedish forest was very, very generous. I'd walk with a basket in hand and I would collect those beautiful golden mushrooms. I'd collect blueberries, rose hips and wild strawberries, all sorts of things. And there was something about the sitting and gathering that awoke some sort of ancient inner feminine flame. And I discovered another superpower: cooking. I was like a witch with a cauldron and an electric stove. And I have never cooked with such power and joy before. And I cooked all sorts of amazing things. I mean, I fried mushrooms. But I made rose hip soup from scratch. I think that deserves a small round of applause. And then I made blueberry sauce, and blueberry jam, and blueberry crumbles, and blueberry slice, and blueberry pies, and blueberry muffins, and I think I even tried my hand at a blueberry risotto, and that's when I realised that I think this superpower had gone to my head too. But regardless of that, all the time I was cooking, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for all of the forest's sweet, sweet gifts. Well, when September came, that forest moved from summer into autumn, and the birch leaves were like little golden hearts hanging from the trees. And I wandered out into the forest this day. It was the 3rd of September. It was my mum's birthday. My mum had been dead now for just over 2 years, and as I stood there in that forest, I thought of her. And for a moment I shut my eyes, and instantly I was transported back to to the backyard of my childhood, and there I was standing in the dappled shade of the giant eucalyptus that shaded the garden. And in the background I could hear the comforting noises of Mum in the kitchen. And when I opened my eyes in the Swedish forest, I felt Mum next to me. And she was laughing and laughing, and I laughed with her. And we began walking through the forest, following a trail of those golden yellow chanterelle mushrooms. And as we walked, we laughed and we talked, and I told Mum all about my new husband and married life and the Swedish forest and all my adventures and travels since she'd gone. And we walked and we talked, and I was so happy. I was bursting with happiness and bliss. And as we walked through the forest to places I'd never been before, and we walked up a rise. And there on top of the hill stood 2 enormous spruce trees. They stood giant like sentinels, and I felt it. It was a portal, a threshold. It was like they were a gateway to something. And I stood there on the precipice, and I felt the invitation, the summons, the pull to step over and into I don't know what. Was it the elemental world? Was it a summoning to spiritual awakening? Was it the absolute, ultimate connection to everything or nothing? Was it oblivion? Well, I don't know. I still don't know, because I didn't take that step. And I don't know whether it was because I was too attached to my body, or whether my ego had too tight a grip on me, but I didn't step over that day. But I do know that I had the best day ever with my mum in that magical forest. And in a few months' time I'm going back to Sweden. And I'm going to wander that forest again, and maybe that golden trail will again lead me up to those 2 trees, and maybe that portal will still be there. And if it is, well, this time I hope I'm brave enough to step through, because I think I know now what's on the other side. See, I think it leads back to once upon a time.